In this video, we're going to learn how to identify different parts of an expression. The first thing that we need to do is identify what type of expression we're looking at. And what we're looking at here at x squared plus 5y plus 3x plus 6 is called an algebraic expression. We know it's algebraic because there are variables involved, and we know it's an expression because we do not see an equal sign. The next thing that we're going to look at are the different parts, the different larger sections. Uh, Basically, we're going to look at this expression, and anytime we see a addition or subtraction sign, we're going to use that as sort of a divider. For example, this first part, x squared, is called a term. Addition and subtraction signs separate our terms. So the next part, 5y, is also a term. 3x is a term. And then 6 is also a term. Now, these terms have specific names, and we're going to look at how to name each of these terms based on the characteristics. In the first term, x squared, that is called a variable term. The reason it is called a variable term is simply because there is a variable involved. The next term, 5y, that's right, is a variable term. 3x, also a variable term. And finally, 6 is a constant term. The reason it's a constant term is because there is no variable involved. So no matter what the value of the different variables are, 6 is always going to be that term. That term 6 is always going to be the same. It doesn't change. Therefore, we call it constant. Next, we're going to look at each term and describe what the different parts of the term are. For example, in this first variable term, x squared, the x is our variable. That is why we called it a variable term. The squared is called an exponent. And there's one more part to this variable term that we do not see but is extremely important to our understanding, and that is the coefficient. The coefficient is a number that is usually directly in front of the variable, and it describes how many of that variable term that we have. So in this case, I have x squared. Well, how many x squareds do I have? I have 1x squared. Therefore, 1 is my coefficient. So 1 is the coefficient. All three of those parts make up the variable term. The next variable term we're going to look at is 5y. So I've got a y, which we know is a variable, and I've got a 5, which is directly in front of the variable, and it tells me how many of that variable I have. Therefore, it is called a coefficient. In the next term, 3x, we see the variable with the coefficient in front of it. And finally, in the last term, which we called a constant term, the 6 is not a coefficient because it is not directly in front of a variable, but since the 6 is by itself, it is called a constant. And those are all the different parts of an expression. Let's quickly look at one more example. 17y raised to the third power plus 5x squared minus 24x plus y minus 15. Altogether, this is called an algebraic expression. The first term, 17y cubed, or raised to the third power, is a variable term. Inside that variable term, the 17 is called a coefficient. The y is called a variable, and the 3 is called the exponent. I've gone ahead and labeled the rest of this algebraic expression, but if you look closely, there is one thing that is missing. As I go through each term, we'll check. We already did 17y cubed. Now let's look at 5x squared. I've got a coefficient, a variable, and an exponent. All of that is labeled correctly. The next variable term is 24x. I have a coefficient and a variable. That's labeled correctly. The next term is y. I have a variable. But what's missing is I'm supposed to have a coefficient. I always have a coefficient in front of a variable. So if I don't see it, it's always going to be a 1. So in this variable term, I'm supposed to have a coefficient. And then finally, the last term, 15, is a constant, which makes up a constant term. These are the different parts of an algebraic expression.